Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. We say it every week in our introduction that we love people who are disrupting the model of education. I think most of us that spend time around higher education recognize that a whole variety of factors, some of which we'll talk about today, are having a huge effect, not just on higher education today, but in the future. We have changing attitudes around higher education. Certainly, there are demographic realities that are taking place that are going to have a huge impact on higher education as well. I like to say in some cases that there are two types of higher educators, those that are innovating for the future and those that are not. There's really only one type of higher educator, and that is those who are innovating for the future, because I'm a believer that if we don't innovate, if we don't disrupt that model of higher education a little bit, the organizations that don't do that are probably not even going to be around to talk about it in 5 to 10 years. We are around this week to talk about that very topic, and we're doing so with Dr. Robert McMahan, who is the president of Kettering University in Flint, Michigan. We are going to learn all about what it means to truly disrupt the world that is higher education. With that, Bob, you've given me the permission to call you Bob.
Absolutely.
Dr. McMahan, thank you so much for joining us here on the Tech Ed Podcast. It's great to have you here.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
So as we just said in the intro, higher education absolutely has to innovate. And I know your model is all about innovation. It's all about disruption. But let's start with this. Is the model of higher education, is it broken in the first place? And if so, what are we not getting right and what do we need to do about it?
That's a great question. I think it's worthy of an hour conversation probably in and of itself. I think it absolutely, significant aspects of it are broken. And it's in part because it really hasn't, as a model, it really hasn't kept pace with the evolution of our economy and the evolution of the needs of society in some really fundamental ways. I always like to say to people, we're so forward-looking as a sector that we wear regalia that was designed in the 1300s,
That's awesome.
and we put some bling on it, but pretty much it's the same. You can trace the academic regalia back to monastic gowns in the Middle Ages.
That's awesome.
It's a place where stability has value. And so it's not just kind of a generic resistance to change. There's reasons why in academia that resistance to change, that kind of long-term stability is of value. But what it has given rise to are models that are increasingly discordant with the needs of society, of industry, and of the economy more broadly. And so in that sense, there are aspects of it that are very much broken.
Really, in some ways, and it's cool, the pomp and circumstance and the robes and the so on that you would see on a typical commencement stage, and kind of hearkening back to the origins of higher education. And there is certainly that history and that gravitas, if you will, that goes along with being an institution of higher education. But to your point, with some of the changes that are taking place in our society and in our marketplaces, we haven't evolved along with those changes. So looking forward to diving into those topics a little bit more deeply over the course of the podcast today. But before we do that, Bob, would just be interested, I did a little bit of homework on your background and your history, fascinating career history that led to you running this great institution of higher education. So touch on that a little bit. What are the highlights of your career and how have the experiences that you've had in your unique path to your current job influenced your views on higher education?
That's an interesting question. I would characterize my career in one way. I said it only makes sense in the rearview mirror. When you sit where I am today and you connect the dots in reverse, they connect in some interesting ways, but you wouldn't necessarily do that looking forward. I've had a career that really spans a wide variety of sectors, but always with roots and always with strong ties to the university and to the university community. I have been a venture capitalist. I have started companies. I have grown those small companies from literally kitchen table entities to multinational companies, organizations. I've been involved in mergers and acquisitions. I've probably hired as many engineers as I've trained over the course of my career. I've been involved in the public policy sphere. I've worked very closely with the governor in a very progressive state, North Carolina, which uses science and technology to re-engineer its economy on an ongoing basis. All of those things I've done while still being connected to the university, always a professor, always with students, always really the first love being education. And so in that combination of things, I have really seen education from both sides. I've seen it from the producer side as well as from the consumer side, and also from the public policy side. So I've seen it from the three legs of the three-legged stool that we always talk about in higher education. And I think that gives me some interesting perspectives on things.
No question. What a fascinating background to lead you into this world of higher education. Now, our producer, Melissa Martin, knows right now that I am mustering every bit of discipline that I can muster not to go down the venture capital rabbit hole, because she knows that is a topic, and we can hijack an entire episode of the podcast just talking about PE and VC models. But we're going to avoid that temptation. And rather than talking about that discipline, let's talk about the discipline that goes along with really forming your strategy as an institution of higher education. Your approach, I know it incorporates these 5 interdisciplinary trends. They're all workplace driven and driving those into every single academic discipline. So what are those 5 trends that you have your eyes on that are having such an impact on how you're thinking about the future of higher ed?
Can I divert us a little bit here?
Yes, let's go down the venture capital hole.
Well, I would love to do that. It was interesting. I was actually a venture capitalist for a nonprofit venture capital firm that served the intelligence community of the United States. It was congressionally tried. It's called Incutel. It's a fascinating model in and of itself. One of the few truly national venture capital firms. So yeah, we can go down that rabbit hole. We won't. Yep. What's really relevant to your question is this. Kettering University as an institution is unique in the United States. It does not work like or look like any other institution of higher education in the U.S. And that is because of the way it was founded and by whom it was founded. And that really speaks to your question in a very fundamental way. We were founded over 100 years ago here in Flint, Michigan, when Flint, Michigan was the Silicon Valley of the United States. People were pouring into this area. This is the home of General Motors. It was, in a very real sense, the home of the automotive industry. And they were pouring in from all over the world, thousands, tens of thousands per year. And the folks who started the automotive industry in the U.S., whose names are brands now, were at that time young entrepreneurs trying to create businesses. I have a picture in my house, the president's house here, of Louis Chevrolet, about 20 years old, doing some really stupid things in these vehicles that he was designing, just like you would expect someone of his age to be doing, right? And they were that, but they had the prescience to understand long before McKinsey ever wrote a piece on the war on talent and all these things, that what was really going to be fundamental to their success was the ability to take this large group of largely unskilled, uneducated people flooding into this area and educate them and bring them into a level of understanding and technical competence that they could contribute in this industry. And so they did this by forming a school, and they brought in Charles Kettering and others who were huge proponents, but they also brought in some people from the northern parts of Michigan, up in the UP, the mining community, which was very heavily oriented around apprenticeship programs and the like. And they had several individuals who went on to be very prominent engineers from that community involved in the creation of this institution as well.
Interesting.
Why that is relevant is they started from a very different model. Now, this is 100 years ago. They said, okay, in order for somebody to be a fully educated professional that's going to contribute to technical industries and technical disciplines, a lot of what they need to learn to be fully educated, they cannot learn in school. They need to learn some things in school, but they cannot learn them in school. And we translate that today with all this discussion about soft skills and teamwork and communications and all. That's all that piece. It's not enough to be a smart engineer. It's not enough to have brilliant ideas. You can have the most brilliant ideas out there, but in isolation, they don't go anywhere. So in order to be effective, you have to not only have brilliant ideas, but you have to understand how to use organization to move those ideas, how to develop them, how to work with other people to mobilize resources to see those ideas come to fruition and to develop those ideas. And so, with that understanding, they built a university, built a school initially, which became us, on a very different model. They said the students are going to spend half their time in an intense, and it is intense, rigorous academic curriculum. And they are going to spend the other half of their time in professional roles in their discipline, practicing that,
Working in the private sector in that case?
working in the private sector, working
Got
in
it.
federal research labs, private sector industry, nonprofits, across all sectors, but they are going to be working in their discipline. And they're not just going to be watching, they're going to be participating members of the staff and members of the team. So when a student then and today, when a student enters Kettering University, they enter a rotation. Every 12 weeks, they spend 12 weeks in classrooms, and these are rigorous programs. We're one of the highest ranked undergraduate engineering programs in the country. And then they leave the university after 12 weeks and they go for 12 weeks into a professional, paid professional role in one of our partner companies and organizations. And we partner with over 450 companies worldwide to provide these opportunities for our students. And they practice as part of the professional teams in those companies for 12 weeks. And then they come back and they enter this rotation as freshmen and they continue it throughout their entire career so that they are here, away, here, away. We have two cohorts that move in opposition. So only one half of our student body is on campus at any given time, and the other is in their professional placement. And then they switch. And what this means is they're able to realize 2.5 to 3 years of professional domain experience at the same time they're getting one of the best technical engineering educations in the country. And at the same time, they're getting paid $75,000 or more dollars for that work. Now, why is that relevant to your question? It's relevant because our students leave us every 12 weeks and they return 12 weeks later, having spent time in some of the world's leading technology companies, some of the
Sure.
most sophisticated companies around. We have students at SpaceX, we have students at NASA, we have students at General Motors, we have students at Libby, we have students across disciplines. We have students who are in venture capital firms, we have students who are in finance organizations, depending on what their major is. And when they come back, they tell us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. We get evaluated every 12 weeks. And
For sure.
so we wind through our curriculum things that are highly relevant to what we are seeing in industry and in technology and in science and the trends that we need to support and we need to educate our students. So you asked about our 5 areas of
Right.
focus.
Your 5 trends. Yep.
Right now, they're advanced mobility, which is all encompassing with autonomous vehicles, et cetera, new energy and new energy vehicles, intelligent manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and sustainability. Those are intertwined into all of our curriculum. So you can go to any one of our majors across the university and see pieces of those in each one of those majors.
Who decides what trends you're going to embed? Because you talk about things like advanced mobility, you talk about certainly energy, artificial intelligence, intelligent manufacturing, or we call it smart manufacturing, industry 4.0, what have you. Certainly all of those are elements of sustainability, but those are all examples, I think, of technologies that change over time, right? We weren't talking about probably at least 3 of those 10 years ago. We probably might not be talking about 3 or 4 of them 10 years from now. Who decides what those trends are?
We constantly evaluate those and we work collaboratively with our industry partners to help define those. One of the things that we, as I'll say something a little sacrilegious, and this probably has to do with that background we were talking about earlier, is I have a kind of a different take that many people have on higher education and who is the customer. If you ask most individuals in higher education, who's the customer of higher education, they will say reflexively, the student is the customer and the families are the customer. I disagree with that. And I'll tell you why. The customer is the person or entity or thing or organization that defines the value of what you do. The person that buys the product, that's the customer. Now, the student and the family, in some sense, is the customer because they're purchasing the product. But the organization that actually defines the value of what you do and purchases the ultimate outcome, which is the educated student, are graduate schools, companies, industries, organizations that hire those students. They define what the value of what you do is. So when I point to the fact that we have one of the highest starting salaries of any university in the United States, we're in the top 20. It's not uncommon for our students to be starting at 80, 90, $100,000 a year when they come out of school.
Sure.
But that's a measure of outcomes, right? That's a measure of value. It's a measure of what is the return on the investment that you're making in higher education. That communication with our partners enables us to stay current. So those 5 areas will change because they have to change.
Right.
And we have to modify what we do accordingly.
For sure. Let me ask you this. One of the changes that we've seen over the course of the last, let's call it 5 years, is that I used to joke that we would hire, whether it's a co-op student or we hire a lot of college interns, we used to try to impart our grand knowledge onto the intern, right? So we would bring the intern in and it was the job of an engineer or a marketing person or a business person to make that person more intelligent, make sure that their skills were more appropriate and applicable through this experience of working in a applied environment. And what we're finding now is that rather than us imparting our knowledge and wisdom to the interns, because the technology is changing so fast and they're learning about things now in their education pathway, especially when it comes to things like AI, data science, analytics, programming, coding, these kind of things, that they're actually teaching us. Are you hearing the same kind of things from your employers where you have students that are through their academic journey learning things that are maybe so cutting edge, whether it's advanced mobility, whether it's smart energy, smart manufacturing, that the student is actually teaching the employer? Are you starting to hear that from your employers?
Absolutely. And that happens a lot. We had a recent graduate, a young lady who was actually from Michigan, who was an industrial engineer. Her first job out of school was to lead a team of 30 engineers to transition product line manufacturing facility from Germany to the United States.
Okay.
That was her first job. And the reason she could do that, for one reason, is it wasn't her first job.
Yep.
But it was also reflective of what the skills that she brought to that. But there's a danger there too, because when if you want to think about the labor contract kind of in the abstract, the labor contract between employee and employer is very different today than it was, say, 30 years ago.
How so? What are the key ways, would you say?
Well, the idea of lifetime employment, for example, is no longer dominant.
Yeah. Hardly a reality, right?
It's hardly a reality. It's much more transactional. It's much more skills-based. It's much more you can bring. It's a employee as free agent at some level model. Very much in the California, Silicon Valley. We need this talent. We need this skill. Let's go out and hire it. When we don't need it anymore, we let it go. We get the skill that we need next.
Right.
Which means that the danger is, and what we try to help our students understand about future-proofing their career, is that the skills that they have today are very perishable and they are fleeting and they have a limited shelf life. And what really we're trying to educate them. I mean, if you start with the assumption, you say, well, some big percentage, half or quarter, whatever number you want to use, of the knowledge that they gain when they are students will be obsolete by the time they graduate.
Interesting. Yeah.
Then what are you trying to teach them? You're trying to teach them instead habits of mind and the discipline to constantly retool themselves and understand that that's a fundamental part of being an engineer or a scientist is constantly educating yourself, constantly reinventing yourself, retooling yourself so that you don't get into the situation. Well, we had that skill. It's like I'm the world's best COBOL programmer.
Right. Yeah. Congratulations. Right. Yeah. Who's doing that, right?
Congratulations. You know,
Yeah.
I saw one of those machines in a museum recently,
Right. Exactly.
right?
Have you read Kissinger's book, Genesis, yet? And if you haven't, you'll love it. So Henry Kissinger, of course, passed away November-ish of last year, I believe it was. And obviously incredible American statesman, passed away at the age of 100 years old, wrote a book with two other folks, one of whom was a former CEO of Google, as he was, entering the last year of his life. And the whole topic of the book called Genesis it's about artificial intelligence, but it's really, and I'm about halfway through it, and I'm getting to something here, but a fascinating book of its own right. It was actually Todd Wanek, who's the CEO of Ashley Furniture Industries, is a really good friend and recommended it to me. So when Todd recommends a book, I buy it because every single recommendation is great.
Good.
But this one, they talk about in that particular book how human beings, the traditional model of education is rote memorization, download information into your brain, go back to an exam and spit it back out. Maybe we're doing some applied learning in the form of an essay or a project and so on. The whole premise of that part of the book is, look, the human brain, the human beings, we're not programmed to memorize information. That's not what we're here to do. We're not even very good at it, save for very, very few of us. It's not about how much information we can necessarily pack into our brain and regurgitate at some point in time. It's about what we're able to do with what we learned. And as you were walking through that and saying, there's this significant percentage of what we're learning as we're going through our academic journey. And I think it's that percentage is increasing as the years go on because technology is changing so fast. That is saying, look, what you learn your freshman year of college in a 4-year university, that might not be even relevant by the time you walk across the stage with those people in their fancy robes and get your diploma. Is that kind of what you're getting at, that we need to be doing something more?
Absolutely. I mean, to your point, the important skills are not rote memorization or rote regurgitation. In fact,
right.
A quick session with ChatGPT can give you just about all the factual data that you need. Right.
Yep.
So, but what we are teaching them is synthesis, integration of data, connecting disparate dots, and create. Because after all, you work venture capital, you see this all the time. Real invention occurs at the intersection of domains. It doesn't typically occur incrementally from something that exists. Real invention occurs from people connecting dots across. And that integration and synthesis is the most important element of learning, I think. And that's what we really are teaching. We're teaching the habits of mind that allow people to be active, engaged, contributing, inventive professionals throughout their career. And that comes from being able to pull things together, to reinvent themselves, to say, okay, COBOL is no longer the language of choice. There's this thing called C, or there's this thing called Java, or this thing called Python. I've just got to keep learning.
Right.
But I can do it. I know I can do it. And I will do it, and I reinvent myself. So it's like a startup. Most startups don't end up doing what they start out to do.
Right.
And most people don't end up doing what they train to do.
Right. Yeah. Well, think about Amazon, right? I mean, Amazon was a bookseller.
Exactly.
And look at what it is now. And I think Jeff Bezos certainly had a vision toward what that could become. But without question, the evolution of business models and that intersection to your suggestion, where I've got somebody who's got subject matter expertise or experience in one area coming into a new area and saying, hey, wait a minute, if I did this that I did in my old organization in this new space that nobody else is thinking about, that's where that innovation comes from. That's where that next great idea comes from. And you're actually teaching students the process of doing that. One of the questions that I have for you, Bob, as we're thinking through this, because I totally getting the model, right? 12 weeks of academic experience, 12 weeks of applied learning, taking what I learned in the workplace back to the classroom, taking what I learned in the classroom back to the workplace. And so we've got this symbiotic relationship between work and learning, and it's a cycle. So do the students come to you with an employer already selected? Do you select that employer for them? How does that work? How do you connect the employer and the student?
We have a whole process for that. For starters,
Okay.
we prepare the student because most students are not an increasing number of students coming to us from high school have very limited work experience.
Right.
And so we have a whole process which we call onboarding. In fact, we don't have a student life function. We have a chief student experience officer here who guides the student through the entire process, beginning with before they get to campus. How do you dress professionally? How do you communicate? In a generation that's used to sending tweets and TikTok videos, how do you communicate with the CEO or the vice president of an organization? Not in a tweet.
Yeah, not all lowercase and six letters or 6 words from a text, right? Yeah.
That's right. So we start there, and then we have a whole process by which companies come to the universities and recruit our students heavily. We'll have several what we call job fairs, but are essentially speed dating exercises between students
Sure.
and companies. And we'll have 200 companies bringing 4 or 5 people, recruiters at a time, to our campus to recruit our students for these co-op positions, for these placements. And then we work with the student to match their career goals, what they're looking for, and the opportunities in industry. And it produces some interesting results. I mean, sometimes the most powerful knowledge is to know what you don't want to do as much as what you want to do. So
For sure.
students can go through this process, find a position, think it's what they've always wanted to do, and then they get in, as we all know who've got a few gray hairs on our heads. Sometimes the practice of a discipline isn't the same thing as the theory of a discipline.
For sure. Yeah, lots of time.
So how tragic is it for a student to go through an entire education, go through 4 years of mechanical engineering, only to find out that they don't like being a mechanical engineer?
And it happens all the time. We hear those stories all the time.
All the time. But our students, they find that out in their freshman year or their sophomore year, and then they change. And so there's a whole process by which we manage that looks kind of like the academic support process at most institutions. We have that too, of course, but we also have this whole parallel piece that works with the professional lives of our students and how that integrates into their academic discipline.
Is there a certain profile of a student that works well in this model? As you're looking at a student, for instance, coming out of high school, are there certain, mindsets, if you will, on the part of a student that work really well and others that are like, oh, maybe this model isn't right for you?
There's a fairly broad profile of students that we see, but I would say if I had to distill it down to some attributes, it's students that like to build things, they like to create things. It's not just about building with your hands, it's about creating things. It can be software, it can be conceptual, but students who are driven and who loved, FIRST robotic students, VEX robotic students, these students are ideal Kettering students because they've already shown they like getting out there. They like doing, they like building, they like competing, they like pushing the envelope. A lot of our students kind of fall into that. Students that are in the garage on the weekends building stuff or sitting at the computer designing new systems or soldering, or it's that inclination towards creation that's a very powerful.
I love that. As we're recording this, I post on LinkedIn several times a week and try to be as creative as possible. And one of my posts from yesterday was a picture of myself as about a 9 or 10-year-old, maybe 11, and my best friend and my younger brother. And we had dragged home, it was a refrigerator box from the appliance store. And we turned it into like a stand-up arcade video game, which wasn't a video game at all, but it kind of worked like one, right? And I was just reflecting on that over the weekend about, we didn't have, that wasn't like a formal process. It was like, all right, it's July 13th or whatever the day is, and we got to fill our day with something today. Let's do this, right? And so we just went off and we found this project to do. And then I think about, as you're mentioning, things like VEX robotics and FIRST robotics, highly creative, and there's all kinds of elements of engineering, but also marketing and business planning and creating the competition environment where the robot is going to do its thing and planning the trips to the competition, all the strategy. I mean, learning all those things. And then there's we've been involved with this effort called Discover AI, which is like getting students while they're still in high school. Yes, let's understand AI and machine learning, but let's do it in the context of drones and unmanned ground vehicles and 3D fabrication and scanning and so on. It kind of feels to me like we mentioned the word Genesis the before, like we're at the beginning of this process of kind of an evolution and a renaissance in K-12 education as well, where we're finally starting to get back to, probably never going to have the day where the two kids walk on their own across the busiest street in town to the appliance store and drag a box back, right? I don't even know if that was safe, but it was fun. But at least to this point where our young people are going to be having these types of experiences in their middle school and high school journey and even in elementary school. Are you sensing the same thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's exciting. It's so exciting. I'll give you two quick examples. I was walking
Sure.
past, we have a large music studio here that was built, and it's a practice studio that was built through the generosity of one of our alumni. And we did that because so many of our students have very strong artistic and musical talent as well. The correlation between math and music is very strong. So I was walking past one day and there's a student playing this incredible concerto on the piano. And I walked in and I said, that is spectacular. It turned out the student was in a junior symphony, concert soloist. But, they were really interested in the software architecture of game design. That's what they were there to do. But they had this whole other side of their personality to them. We built a building a couple of years ago here on campus, which is really unique in the US. It's really built around our model of interaction. And one of the things you see students over there all the time, they'll be sitting in a room, they'll have an idea, they'll walk down one flight of stairs, get a piece of pizza, walk over 50 feet, and pick up their 3D printed model of the thing that they were talking about, before they went and got. And you see that kind of fluidity now across technologies, across. I think it's incredibly exciting.
It is,
And
but it totally speaks to the need for a different model of higher education, right? 'Cause, I mean, your model's innovative to begin with, right? I mean, you think about the typical, 4-year university experience of the, whatever it is, the 13-week quarters and the, 26-week semesters or whatever they end up being, but less than that. But then then we're doing our internship in the summer, or we have a job or whatever, or maybe we do a co-op for a semester, and you've got this ongoing relationship between the two of them. But what are some of the other ways that higher education needs to innovate so that we can meet that student where they are, the one that's innovating on their first robotics course or their first robotics team in high school, and then they are going off and having that piece of pizza and walking back to the 3D printer, and there is that part that they designed and engineered on their own. What are some of the other ways that we need to innovate higher education?
that's a great question. And it really comes from a perspective of, I think, understanding that one of the things we need to think about higher education, and we need to start designing higher education in this country to recognize that it is a spectrum. It is not a model. And we have treated it as it is a model. And if you look across the country, there are some 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, a huge majority of which look effectively, essentially the same,
Totally.
with the exception of the architecture of the campus and the food they serve in the union. What we need to think about, I think, seriously, is a consolidation of higher education in this country around the notion that there are different forms of higher education and they serve different purposes. And we need to think about how we optimize individual institutions to those missions. And that's a bit of vigorous hand waving in your answer, but Kettering is a perfect example of what that looks like when you do that and what it produces when you do that. And there are others. There are others in the arts. There are others in the sciences. There are others in across disciplines.
Are there other ones that you would point to in addition to Kettering that are like, wow, these folks are really, really coming up with a creative approach to higher ed?
Yes, there are. I mean, when it comes to the kind of model that we have, we see a lot of partial implementations, if you will. There's a lot of programs that have co-op programs or internship programs, but there's no modification of the core structure of the university and the academic delivery. I mean, we deliver our service differently in a different way than everyone else does. Our calendar is different. We have to get special exemptions from our accreditors because of the nature of how we deliver credit to our students. And we have to go through all sorts of hoops to demonstrate that ours is equivalent or better than the traditional institution. And so there are other programs that are similar to us, but none that integrate experiential learning to the degree that we do. And I think that's the real power of the model. But there are other domain specific institutions, especially in the arts. You have schools like the College of Creative Studies in Detroit. You have schools like the California Institute of the Arts. You have specialty schools that have tailored their curriculums to specific domains in this way. But it's driven in large part or driven fundamentally by defining who the customer is and what are they telling you.
Absolutely. I won't say the person's name, but I've thought about this so many times. About 4 years ago, we had a dean at an institution of higher education who said, he asked the question, is our job to create a job for every student or a student for every job? And his argument was his job was to create a job for every student or to have a job for every student. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I mean, that to me seems a little bit backwards. It's not that you have to find a student for every job, but shouldn't we look at where the careers are going and find talent to be able to support those careers? And if those are innovative companies, or if those are employers that are looking for talent that's been, trained and upskilled and educated in a different way, it feels to me like that's the market we're after. And it seems like you're looking at it exactly the same way. Certainly you're going to do well by your students, but you only do well by your students if you do well by the people that are employing your students and the communities that are benefiting from their existence and the skills and the competencies that they have. I could continue on this path for hours. I do want to pose two final questions to you, Bob, and they're ones that we ask every single guest here on the podcast. And the first one we've dove into already, and with your conversations about how we disrupt higher education and your different views on education in general, might be even hard to top some of the things that we've already talked about. But what is one of those things that you believe about education that would surprise a lot of people?
I kind of came up through the traditional structure of education. I think what would surprise people is how fluid I do believe education and education should be in the United States. We do the community college level within our economy, within our society. I think we do it grave disservice. I think they are a very powerful contributor to the solution of this problem, and we don't leverage them in the way that we should as a society, and that many countries actually do. If you look towards countries like Germany, for example, the way that they view higher education as a spectrum and as a lifelong activity, I think it's a very healthy one. And perhaps that's the thing that people would surprise from a traditional university president.
Yeah, for sure. Agree 100%. And I'm a big believer that it's all an and, not an or, right? It's not a 4-year university or an advanced degree or a technical college certificate, diploma, what have you. We need all of these. And the more fluid, to use your word, that we can make the process of education and the choices and the on-ramps and the off-ramps and people not making life decisions necessarily, and knowing that you can, to your earlier point, you can step back from a decision you made if you decide that decision wasn't the right one for you as you look to your future. So all these different options, but to hear that from a university president really gives me optimism for the future of education because partnerships in those regards really, really important. Thinking about optimism for the future, I want to take you all the way back to when you were a 15-year-old young man with your whole future in front of you. And we're going to ask you our final question that we, again, love to ask every single guest here on the Tech Ed podcast. And if you could go back to that 15-year-old sophomore in high school version of Bob McMahan, everything that you've done, the experiences you've had, everything that you've learned, all of the different sectors that you've spent time with, knowing that you've got that huge variety of experience and wisdom now, what would you share with that 15-year-old version of Bob McMahan if you could give him one piece of advice?
How long you got? The thing I look back on those things is nothing ever happens fast enough when you're that age. And this is something I tell students when I talk to them, when they come to me and talk about it. Well, I've been doing this for 6 months now and it's just not going. I said, well, okay. But things never happen fast enough. They never develop fast enough. when you're that age. And so probably the one thing I would counsel is that, and patience, and an understanding that the future you, everything you learn along the way and every experience that you have is a piece of the future you. And you will only know how to connect the dots in reverse. And they will connect if you're open to those experiences and open to that. But I think that's probably.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes 100% sense. And, I talk, and I've got my kids are now in their 20s, and I can't tell you how many times at every juncture of life when I'm one of them, and all kids deal with one challenge or another, was dealing with a challenge. And I would always say, you know what, this doesn't make any sense right now, but I guarantee you in 2 or 3 or 4 years, looking back on it, you'll understand why we had this experience. Exactly. So
Right.
connecting those dots, so important. And so I think apropos for our audience as well, Bob. So appreciate that. You're right. Things never happen fast enough when you're a 15-year-old kid. I'll tell you something that happened too fast was this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. I can't believe that our time disappeared as fast as it did. I feel like we have so much more to talk about. Would love to have you back sometime. In the meantime, though, Bob McMahan, who is the president of Kettering University, Dr. Robert McMahan, officially, thank you so much for joining us here on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thank you. I had a wonderful time. I appreciate it.
And thanks to our audience for being here as well. A great conversation with Dr. Robert McMahan, president of Kettering University. We covered a lot of great information. You can find information about Kettering and many of the topics we talked about here on the podcast at our show notes. You'll find those at techedpodcast.com/McMahan. I'll spell that for you, techedpodcast.com/McMahan. When you're done there, of course, check us out on social media. We are all over LinkedIn. We are on TikTok. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram. Wherever you consume your social media, you will find the Tech Ed Podcast. And we hope you find us here again next week. We will be here and looking forward to seeing you then. Until then, my name is Matt Kirkner. I am the host of the Tech Ed Podcast, and thank you for being with us.